kindly introduced me. I'm Nicola. I'm one of the practitioners at the Staff Counselling and Psychological Support Service at Leeds University. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a trainer. I sit on the BACP workplace organisation, and I'm also chair for the mental health subgroup for the Council for Work and Health. I've got about 19 slides. There's one that I will dwell on for quite a while. But really, I think what I'd like to encourage you all to do is to get curious and to kind of drop expectation and pressure a little bit. That's kind of really helpful for me as well. But to engage your curiosity as researchers, that should be something that you know quite a bit about. And at every stage, as I'm kind of presenting ideas, I'd like to really encourage you to think about what does that mean for you and how might that work out for you, or how might that question be relevant for you. Mental health, as I'm sure you're all aware, is part of our overall health, is certainly more recognised and understood than it ever was before. And in terms of pre-COVID, was a major issue in our industry. Through COVID, of course, to a greater extent, people experiencing all sorts of different mental health conditions. But before I say any more, what I'd like to do is to invite you all to kind of arrive. And I know people are still literally arriving in the session as well, and that's fine. But I'm going to do it too, so you're going to have to look at my chest for a few minutes. But I'd like to encourage everyone to stand up. And so mind out for any pets, small children or objects around you, but to stand up for a minute or two. And of course, I can't see you doing it, so I'll take it on trust. But I just want to encourage you all to stretch. So if you just put your hands together and just stretch your hands forward and feel that stretch across your back, and hands at your back, and you might have even heard my shoulder blade just click a little bit there. And I'd really like to encourage you to just move from side to side as well. One of the things that has gone on over the last year, and you guys will know it as well, particularly for research, is a heck of a lot of extra screen time and sitting. And actually, these immobilized positions are really bad for our mental health and for our bodies. So movement is absolutely key. So resume your seat really gently and try, if you can, depending on what seat you are sitting on, to get your feet square on the ground, really flat on the ground. See if you can sit on your sitting bones. One of the things that happens to us with sitting a lot is we collapse forward, we collapse back, and actually as soon as we go into those collapsed positions, we start to produce stress hormones. Stress hormones affect our functioning and certainly do affect, of course, our mental health. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about mental well-being and being not resilient. Unfortunately, the word resilient has been distorted, taken out of shape to kind of mean that we should be able to cope with everything and bounce back under all circumstances. That just isn't possible. It's not human. But we can think about how we might need to be versatile. And certainly in the competitive world of research that you're all experiencing, I'm going to touch on biopsychosocial responses to real or perceived threat. I'm going to talk a bit about attachment theory, Workable Ranges model, and I'm going to encourage you to reflect upon how COVID might have had an impact and changed the way you work. For those of you, I tried to put this in the slide, but I couldn't get it. So for those of you who know the researchers' development framework, then what we're looking at here is domain B, that one there, and personal effectiveness. And As far as I'm concerned, your individual experience and your health and mental health absolutely have an impact upon all those other domains, your knowledge, your research governance, your ability to concentrate, and of course, engage and influence and talk with other people. But don't worry, I'm not going to talk too much. In fact, I'm not going to reference any of that again. I'm sure you all know that very well. So some of the notions behind the things I'm going to mention today go right back to the 1930s and before. Human etiology, all about human adaptation, survival, how we respond to threat. A wonderful chap called Walter Bradford Cannon, some of you will have heard of him, talked about the wisdom of the body right back in 1932 and our fight-flight response. The notion of an inner world coined by Claude Bernard, and the sense that we actually have our bodies have a natural approach to trying to regulate themselves, and this idea of homeostasis. And I'm sure on some of the work you do, you'll be thinking about and working with people in terms of their self-regulation and self-maintenance, if you like. We could also make a nod to Aristotle and the idea that the sum is greater than the parts. So we're going to talk about all the different parts that build into our well-being. Attachment theory, John Bowlby, 1950s, commissioned by the World Health Organization to explore the conditions that would help children orphaned by the war. And he came then into sort of understanding these two goal-corrected systems, biological systems, care-seeking, caregiving, and understanding that it was children's experience of these two systems that helped them, and we took the Holy Grail, which gain a secure base in terms of our well-being. He also worked later on in his life to think about adult mental health and how adult mental health is affected and changed by organizations too. But one of the things that he really nailed is this notion of the interaction between a caregiver and a care seeker, in which when it works well, both parties experience satisfaction. Mary Ainsworth joined John, and she did lots more work around the parent-child interaction, in particular the mother-child interaction, and started to really hone in on the nature of those exchanges between people and how important they were. Dorothy Hurd furthered this research and started to explore how it was the nuances within those relationships and the effectiveness of care seeking and caregiving which enabled children to then resume play. So there's something about what happens when we have needs. When those needs are satisfied, we can then go on and do other things. And they talked then about 4 attachment styles, which I'm not going to talk about. You'll be relieved to today. Brian Lake joined Dorothy Hurd as research partner and then life partner, became very interested in organizational dynamics and the powerful impact that interests, and this is really important as researchers, have on our well-being. Coming sort of a little bit more up to current times then, Una McCluskey did more research on these interactions between care seekers and caregivers, noticing then that actually it enables people, a good interaction enables people to get back to their sense of their own competence. Una's work is also very focused on burnout, compassion fatigue, something that we can see all around us right now, and the notion of attunement. So that's the piece that we're going to look a lot at, is how is this for you? How do you notice what's going on inside your bodies? I'm going to make a reference to Stephen Porges and vagal theory, Robert Thayer, calm energy, Dan Siegel, neurobiology a little bit, but probably most significantly, Anthony Damasio, my favorite neuroscientist, who's really started to get underneath the role of emotions in terms of how we are, and thinking about also homeostasis. A great book if you want to read it. And then our very own Dr. Sally Rose, my boss, manager of our service, who's coined the Workable Ranges model now here at Leeds. And I've done some work with Una as well in terms of the theory. So The Holy Grail, then, what is it like for you as researchers? We're looking to get a secure base. In order to feel okay, we need to have a level of security and stability. So around the secure base, please forgive the bouncy ball, we have these systems. Care seeking. So care seeking is a goal-corrected system. It's something that starts from when we're children or from we're babies, and it's our requirement for food, for warmth, for comfort, for some form of nourishment and safety. And how we carry on care seeking as adults, so it doesn't ever stop. But what you might not be sort of conscious of is the patterns that we learn as children inform the way we care seek as adults. So as care seeking, you could also think of help seeking. So thinking of yourself as researchers then, how do you know what you need for your research, and how do you know how well you get it? Effective care seeking means that when we can tune into our needs and we can get them resourced, it means that our care seeking is supportive and is effective, and we recognize. So if I kind of bring it back to the idea of work, if I'm doing a piece of research and I'm stuck, I'll experience some kind of biological phenomenon in my body, as well as maybe some thoughts going on. I might not necessarily need somebody to answer my problem, whatever that might be, but I'll need someone to interact with, to give me a positive interaction in order for that sense of need or requirement to become pacified, if you like. So I get a biological sense of satisfaction. If our care-seeking patterns, our habits, are unsupportive, then what I might do is I might confuse people about the things that I need. I might fear for asking, maybe from previous experiences of being rejected. And I know you've had a talk also about rejection in funding. So for research, that's a great risk. Or I might just not be able to actually articulate what I need. And of course, the supervisory relationship is based around care seeking and caregiving. So caregiving, of course, is the complementary system. So these are the two that John Bowlby nailed. Caregiving is either effective or ineffective, and it is something that we learn from our really early years. So we will learn from the patterns of care that we received as children, received as teenagers, received into our 20s, our 30s, etc., and we replicate some of those patterns, and thankfully we can adapt and change. Caregiving is, as I said, the complement to care seeking, and again, it's also goal corrected. So when you offer some support, some advice, you help a fellow researcher with a particular problem, you will get a biological sense of satisfaction. You know when you've met their need. And actually, one of the problems with COVID is because people have become so disconnected because of the internet, is we're not getting those same feeds or responses back from each other, which are really important actually for our well-being. So in terms of caregiving, how do you know what your peers or colleagues might need for their work or research? And do you know how well you respond to those needs? And then a bit of a heads up, compulsive caregivers, there'll be some of you that habitually look after the needs of others because you're not getting your own needs met. And this is where the work of Una and burnout comes into it. If we become compulsive caregivers to others, sorting out their problems, doing maybe bits of their work, it appears to satisfy something, a need in us, but actually what it leaves is obviously a loss of our energy and our resources. Caregiving, if it's effective, of course, works really well. But the other thing that can happen is we can become dominant or submissive in our caregiving. So again, think about, how do I know what I need? How do I get it? And how do I give care or response to other people? So when these two systems aren't interacting, our self-defense system kicks in. So this is our autonomic nervous system that alerts us to, and you will know, some of you will know lots about this, to danger. And the thing around danger is it's real or perceived threat. So the reasons horror movies work is because my body responds to the threat as though it were real. But of course, in terms of work, deadlines, worry about success, funding, or are real threats to how we are. The self-defense and fear system kicks out, and this is where the polyvagal theory comes into a little bit, but I'll talk about that later. It kicks out our competence. It changes the way that we think, because it is literally our desire to survive under those circumstances. So understanding and normalizing our fears are crucial for our health. If we can name and nail what we're most fearful about, what it does to us, and recognize what it does to us, then actually what we can start to do is catch it sooner, name it. And the minute, the reason why talking works is that if we describe to ourselves what's going on, or better to someone else, we start to gain perspective. So the autonomic nervous system then doesn't hold us ransom, if you like. Interest and interest sharing. The fourth system in this set, brought together by Una, is then that, and this is the only one that is also really, really interpersonal, because we can do it on our own. And this is research. Research is all about interest and interest sharing. And again, you will experience times when you make a breakthrough in your work, or you get into a period of flow and it feels exciting, that it's really rewarding and invigorating. You gain vitality from it. This system to be working well, obviously we need to have enough interest and to feel like we are sharing those interests with each other, and that also comes into the supervisory but also relationship with your research groups or research collaborators. That exchange of information that feels non-competitive. So it's the very difference between the competitive stuff which sits in the fear system rather than the open collaboration. So do you know where your common ground is, and do you know how you might serve your common interests as researchers? The next system, sexuality. Don't panic, as I say. Of course, our most intimate relationships are crucial to our health and well-being, but also there's something about our vitality of our sense of ourselves. So do you know where you get your kind of most intimate vitality from? And it doesn't necessarily, of course, have to be in relationship, but actually, can you see or feel what's sexy also about your work and your research? Does it engage you? Does it sort of lift you up? The next system, the penultimate one, is in our internal environment, and this can be really significant for researchers because it's all about our internal world. And out of all of these systems, biological systems, this is the only one that's not goal corrected. So our internal environment is that internal chunter. It's the resource, our neurological system that is constantly changing and flexing, building on our experiences, our successes, our failures. It's your internal chunter. So do you know, or are you aware of what you might be saying about yourself and your research? Do you give yourself a positive experience? Is your internal environment supportive or unsupportive, generally in terms of your work? And the last is our external environment. And this one most obviously heavily impacted by COVID. Our external environment also goal corrected, and some of you will notice this, that you'll feel in flow and feel comfortable when your desk is laid out in a certain way, or your room is set up when you finally got whatever you needed to be working all the time from home, where you are working from home. Do you notice how that impacts upon your creativity? Are you someone who needs music? Are you someone who needs silence? Might there be different external environments that suit you for different work activities? If you're working in the hospital, that environment will be impacting upon you. So it's either supportive again or unsupportive. So the idea here is that all of these systems work together as a restorative process. They're going to be going, sometimes they'll all be fine and sometimes they won't. So I'm just going to pause for one moment to get you all to reflect. So just have a look at the screen, and if you've got paper and pen, all the better, and just see which of these systems, if you can, that you think that maybe this would be a place for you to think a little bit more about how that is for you. So what we kind of want to encourage you to do is to tune into where you're at. Is there something around seeking care and support around your work, or making connection with someone who might be able to offer you some non-competitive or non-dominant care that to help you with whatever's going on? Is there someone that you could be interest sharing differently in terms of your research, your work activity? But just see which of those actually, you know, kind of resonated with you, if they did. And the counter question as well, if there's one on there that's really agitated you in some way, or you kind of feel a bit turned off by it, then Jung had this lovely phrase, is look for the gold in the shadows. So if there's one of those that you really don't like the look of, what I would suggest is that maybe there's something there for you that's worth having a look at. And of course, you don't have to share or say that. So just think about those questions, and of course, you'll be able to reflect on them afterwards. So Workable Ranges is a model that my boss, Sally Rose, has brought together from a range of different stress theories. And what she's done is she's kind of blended them into this diagrammatic model. And the principle of Workable Ranges is that we all have this bandwidth. I don't know if any of you can see my hands moving, but a bandwidth that's flexing all the time. And it starts in that middle bit is where we feel okay. It's where we feel our feelings and reactions are tolerable given the situation that we're in. We feel creative enough, or we feel energized enough, or you know, tired, but tired in an okay kind of way. And this bandwidth is changing all the way, all the time, all the way through the day. It's affected by being hungry. It's affected by being tired. It's affected by being frightened. It's affected by our workload. It's affected by deadlines, and it's flexing and moving all the time. So one of the things I like about Sally's model is she encourages us to think about when we're okay first. So again, what I'd like you all to do, and in the chat afterwards, when we finish this, maybe you can sort of express some of your experiences, but how do you know you're in flow? How do you know that you're in the green range, in your workable range? What's your research like at that point? Or what are your interactions like with others? And for those of you who are reflectors, you know, kind of write those questions down, because one of the things that happens, a lot of stress theory points us towards noticing when we're not okay and not giving us enough opportunity to dwell on when we are okay. And in terms of competence and feeling all right, we need to be able to recognizing, even if it's fleeting, if you've had a really challenging day, one decent interaction, one decent bit of care seeking or caregiving enables us to recognize that feeling in ourselves a little bit, and helps us as we adapt and become versatile going forward. Outside of the workable range, then at the top we have chaos, hyper, and at the bottom we have hypo. So hyper is high arousal. So that's your fight, flight responses, high heart rate. This is where the vagal theory comes into it. When there's so much adrenaline, cortisone coursing through my veins that my vagal nerve changes so much, the sheathing changes, and it deactivates some aspect of my prefrontal cortex. I do not think in the same way. I might not even think at all. It's my response to extreme threat, and it just happens in just, you know, the shortest amount of time. Down below is hypo. So this is when we move into shutdown and freeze. And for those of you who are working in hospitals, you will have experienced and seen a lot of these responses, either in yourselves or in other people. And again, it's a threat response. We don't get to choose whether we go to hyper or hypo. These are just our responses. What we can get to do is to recognize our experiences of these two places. But also what we have in this model is a window of tolerance. So for all of us, there will be preferences in where you like to be. So out of range is out of range, one way or another. But in range, some of you will have a preference to being a little bit more towards the red area, so towards that threshold. So the activists of you, maybe some of the pragmatists, the people who like to be engaged, the people who thrive on powering through to-do lists, who can kind of work in fast flow, if you like. Some people will prefer a more very stable in the middle kind of position, and others will prefer a place closer to the blue. So those of you who are reflectors, theorists maybe, who want to take a greater amount of time to think about things, don't like to be sort of jumped into fast action or to make decisions very quickly. So what's really important is to notice where your window of tolerance is, because if you prefer to be at the top and you're required to slow down, it's going to pull and reduce your workable range. If your preference is more towards the blue and people try and get you busy or active, or there's lots of animation, then you're going to be pulled out of range faster. And of course, in any team, there will always be people who are in lots of different places. And this is my only contribution to, to Sally's theory. I describe that as Tiggers and Eeyores. And of course we have, and I apologise to anyone who doesn't know Winnie the Pooh, but we have the whole gang on there. If you're in a Tigger mood and you encounter an Eeyore, it has a real impact on those care-seeking, caregiving relationships or interest sharing. It might also arouse our fear. So what happens is we're not met in the same kind of way by other people. It has an impact on how we feel about ourselves. It, of course, has an impact upon others. And actually, it's really interesting that Sally and I kind of have these interactions. So if I kind of bounce in when we can be in the same environment, and I'm in a Tigger place and she's in Eeyore, you can almost palpably feel her dismay as I'm kind of trying to pull her into some kind of action. And of course, if I'm in Tigger mood as well, actually I can feel I'm being pulled away from my preference and my excitement and my animation. And of course, one day I might move from being Tigger all the way through to being Eeyore. So like with the wheel, it's really important to know in terms of regulating where you are and what you need. Now, you might not always get your needs satisfied, but if we can recognize that there's a deficit or there's something to do, then we can start to look after ourselves and recognize our differences too. And in either place outside of workable range, it's not conducive to great research. Of course, it's obvious, isn't it? We can't do the concentrated thinking when our minds are racing, and also down the bottom where you might feel also really lowly motivated or demoralized. Again, it's really hard to do the work we might need to do. But within range, there might be certain tasks that are more suited to being in the red and more closer to the red, and other tasks suited to being further towards the blue as well. So in an ideal world, we would, of course, just be moving all the way through our workable range through the day, and somewhere in there, thinking about your window of tolerance, there will be your sweet spot. You'll know those times when you're in flow with your work, or you're feeling creative with other people, or you have capacity to give care to others without great cost to you. And this is where the Thea sort of information comes from around what keeps us and gives us calm energy. So whether it's a bit of food at a certain point when we might experience a bit of dip, or a bit of animation. So if you're in a Tigger, you might need to, in a Tigger place, you might need to have somebody who you can kind of be bouncy and excitable with. So noticing where your sweet spot is really important. So that's what regulated stress and emotion looks like. But of course, we experience lots of dysregulated stress and emotion, and what we would call research turbulence, which looks a little bit more like this. So we quickly go, we might be in range for a bit, and then something happens. You might get some bad news about your research or about funding, and it takes you to the hyper place. You might be able to restore, you get briefly back into your range, and then something else comes along and sort of drops you down. What happens is these extremes, these fast movements, have a real impact upon our sense of confidence and competence, our sense of ourselves. You can't be separate from the turbulence that you go through. You might feel here that you start to utilize what we would call maladaptive coping strategies. So when we're in a panicked place, actually panicking other people, or when you might flit from different activities way too fast, not giving yourself nearly enough chance to refocus. It takes at least 54 seconds to move from one activity to another, and to properly refocus, probably about 20 minutes. So when we move really fast from activity to activity, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves masses of stimulus, and actually it becomes more of a threat stimulus, so it makes us feel worse and more panicky. Down the bottom as well is where you might find procrastination, where you're putting things off because your morale, your sense of vitality is low. Also bits, of course, of hopelessness, and that's where also depression, clinical depression sits. So people actually have a chemical experience of these particular places. So keeping an eye on this sort of turbulence, as I say, and thinking about what maladaptive coping strategies might have crept up on you over the last year. Is there any kind of self-medication going on that's perhaps not too helpful? Are you noticing that you get periods of hyperactivity and then periods of no activity? And we have to really watch out for that. So we need to notice when we're in our workable range. That's the first part of Sally's theory, noticing and paying attention and giving ourselves credit for being okay, for however long it might be. Noticing also that when we become mobilized and charged, what is your biological data? That's what I love about these two particular theories, is it constantly refers to emotions and our biological responses as biological data. How can I tune into what my body's doing? And sometimes they might be very strange signals that you have. So for instance, one of mine is when I'm mobilized is when I'm typing, I have to clear everything off my desk, take my watch off, because there's some kind of strange idea in my body that I'm going to be able to type faster and get emails dispatched in a much more speedily way. Of course, it never happens. Actually, what happens is there are far more typos, and hopefully I don't press send. But I can catch that for some reason, that's kind of my hook, my behavior to notice that I'm not okay, that I've become upregulated. How can I notice then also that I've become downregulated, that I've moved into the blue? Is it a retreat? Am I not contacting people? Has my inner talk, so thinking about that internal environment, has my inner talk started to get quite either dark, of course, and that's of great concern, or am I shutting off from people, or really giving myself a bit of a critical kicking? So really thinking about where I've gone to in those places and how you recognize those symptoms in you. And it's the catch. So everything about mental health is about the catch, is normalizing your experiencing, catching where you are and thinking about what might help you at that point in time. And of course, what might have been made worse by the pandemic. Now, for some people, particularly introverts and people who are shyer, the opportunity to not engage with lots of people has been a great opportunity, but there also might be lots of differences, lots of isolation. So for those of you who recognize yourself as Tiggers, you know, to be held back from lots of social interaction will have had a consequence on your health. So really thinking about where your autonomy is, what choices, if you have, might be around. If we spend too long outside of our workable range, what happens is this bandwidth becomes diminished. So too long in fight becomes obviously is bad for our heart, it's bad for our bodies, it's our bodies working super fast. Flight means that we might be wanting to avoid, so coming back to the attachment theory, avoid the things that are going on, and actually without the opportunities, particularly in lockdown, to run, to escape, people may well feel more trapped, or moving to freeze and feeling still stuck at those times when you might not be able to engage with your screen work. And with the extended amount of screen work, some of you might be starting to notice a bit of screen aversion sometimes. So thinking about how that impacts upon you and where you've gone to. So the thing we need to think about is that when we're wired and tired in this way, then our workable range, those systems, that fear system in particular, kicks in and leads to burnout at that very end. People start to experience this ricochet, almost thinking that they might have bipolar or be bipolar, or having, effectively a nervous breakdown, wired, big activity, and collapse afterwards. And the more time that you're having this experience of the workable range diminishing, then there's less experience of competence, less experience of restoration, a less sense of vitality and pleasure in whatever your experience is in. And I'm sure some of you will know this, but burnout is now classified as an official medical condition. Adrenal fatigue also recognized as adrenal fatigue. We just don't want to get to the place of burnout, because not only does it have a huge impact upon our overall health, but if you experience burnout, then you're not going to be going back to work in the same way, shape, or fashion. I don't want to just frighten you, but it's so important to catch that this was happening. And also it has an impact on our relationships, how we feel about ourselves, but can have really serious health consequences. So catching that we're moving into these places and it's a call to take action. So it's really tuning into what's going on for you. And this is a really unattractive slide, so I'm sorry about that. But the other thing we can experience, and this is kind of the latest piece of Sally's research, is pinch point. So those days when you have a perfect storm of events, when you've gone care seeking or help seeking from your supervisor or someone else, and they've either given you the strangest answer or sent you off on a complete different direction. When maybe you're working at the hospital and you're just surrounded with people who are exhausted, depleted, or frightened, or you get an email from someone asking you to do another piece of work or rejecting an idea or an opportunity of funding, and then somebody gives you a funny look. So that's our threshold. It collapses in that point, and that can be really frightening. But a pinch point, all being well, a pinch point, you will recover your range again. So it's thinking about what to notice that and take action, but what might help you recover some of your range. Obviously, repeated pinch points and collapse again are going to lead to that your kind of workable range becoming reduced and your experience of feeling okay much diminished. So what can we do about it? We have to think about then, and you think about, what is it like to be in your workable range as a researcher? You know, how do you recognize that, and how do you congratulate yourself for being in those places for as long as you are? What helps you when you're mobilized, down, regulate? So when you have energy, when you're not just Tigger, but you're out into the red, How might you manage your body? Is it exercise? Is it talking to somebody? What can we do when we're immobilized, when we move into blue? So how can you give your body energy? What's a healthy distraction from that point in time? And what can we do when we're in the roller coaster, wired and tired? And really importantly, as researchers, is how can you support each other and help spot these signs with each other, and kind of amplify your successes. And this is what I'm going to kind of hope to get you to do also in the chat in a minute. So what are your tell signs? So the thing to kind of think about is, how do you want to be like in a few years' time or 2 years' time? How would you like to know that you're doing a great job in help seeking and getting good care for your research? And this is where, for those of you who love setting goals, this is an opportunity to do that. How might you notice that you're meeting your colleagues' needs without defensively or dominantly or submissively giving them all of your energy? And how are they responding to you? Can you name and recognize your fears, and maybe look at anything that you might do in that and notice the physical phenomenon of that? Can you see where your interests and interest sharing are going? That's your actual research. And how will you be able to judge that going forward? Where is the vitality and the sexiness in the work that you do? You really are allowed to say that. And your internal environment as researchers, again, super important. What are you telling yourself about your work and your approach and your collaboration? Are others saying useful things to you about your research? And of course, what is your external environment? What's your ideal external environment to get to, and how might you achieve that? One of the great things about imagining our success is giving us a chance to actually work towards the place that suits us. And remember, we're all different. So just think of one thing before I come and stop sharing the PowerPoint. One thing out of all of those that I've mentioned that might be good for you to do. And whether it's naming some of the fear you're going through or getting a different level of help, mental health is all about knowing who we are, recognizing ourselves, where we are in the places we are, and thinking about the thing that's going to help support us going forward. And that in itself is a competence. So just think about just one thing that you might be able to do for yourselves. So I'm going to stop sharing that now, having romped through it. And what would be really nice, actually, is if in chat you could put in there on chat for me some of your ideas of when you're in range, or actually any of the systems that might have resonated with you. And then if there's questions too, you can let me know. But first, when do you know that you're in range? Well, let's go back to chat. Great. So need to recognize more the times I'm feeling okay and doing well rather than attend to the times when things go wrong. Absolutely, Marion. That's the kind of the absolute gold in doing this. And because, of course, research is about excellence as well, and it is about that, the 2% that's not right. We ignore the 98%, but also just those moments of success. So what about anyone else? How do you know you're in range? What's your experience of green or really effective care-seeking caregiving? In range when getting enough sleep and getting enough yoga in. So really recognizing then the impact of using our bodies and what happens to our bodies when we store up all of that adrenaline too. And actually, of course, because the stress hormones are such empowering, they're activating hormones that sort of doing something physical can be great. And one of the things I would say is that if you know the stress and the strain is in your body, go to your head. If you know the stress and strain is in your head, go to your body. It's almost like go to a different place that you're in. I feel I'm in range when I have creative thoughts that I want to share. Absolutely. So we notice that we're in flow. We might be more generous. We might be more open. Some of you will also notice that you have higher levels of humor. Being able to stop thinking about work at the end of the day. So one of the huge things about COVID, but as researchers, you'll know your research and your work and your laptops probably follow you around much more. But we need to think about separation. So remember that external environment. Do you switch off and move away from your work so that you can then move to it actually at different times? So what about being out of range? Whether you go to the red or the blue, what sorts of things might you experience? Yeah, absolutely. Procrastination and low mood without a doubt, because there's something about, so coming back to the avoidance stuff, as we move away from the things that are scary. I know when I'm in rage, when I notice that I'm having creative thoughts, but I'm not distracted by them, I've been hyper. Absolutely, that's a good catch. So noticing the difference of the experience of the thoughts and those moments, and actually writing things down. So remember the cognitive affect the vagal nerve affecting our cognitive function. So we might still, what we can do is when we've got thoughts either in the red or the blue, what you can do is if you get them out of your mind, then your mind will stop playing them over again. Anybody else got experience of being either in the red or the blue? Absolutely. So noticing, becoming frustrated. So it's a really good catch that our tolerance, our ability, and actually, if you think about how these two models work together, so if my range is diminished, my capacity to give care or attention to others is much diminished because my resource is low. My capacity to interest share is also diminished. So biologically, there literally isn't the ability for us to engage in those things. Now, of course, sometimes we might have to mask it and jump over ourselves and still do a thing because it has to be done. But in those circumstances, then what I do is encourage you to think about how you restore some degree of balance and get some space afterwards. Out of range, when things, the external environment that I usually like, such as listening to music, then start to, absolutely. So the things that you love normally become annoyances. And actually, it's a great it's a really interesting part about our fear system, that when our fear system is activated, it literally narrows our perceptual field and our ability to take more in. And if you're further along on the spectrum, it's going to be especially the case. It narrows our ability to take more in, and things become more annoying because we become hypervigilant. Yep. So, and it's catching. So if you know you're in the blue and you're avoiding your work, then there's something about noticing that and kind of, if you like, finding or giving yourself when you can that time to not work, and then scheduling when you are going to re-engage with your bits of work, or trying to kind of sneak up on yourselves. When I'm out of range, I tend to seek distraction in time, what I should previously set aside to work more deeply, doing small jobs. Lovely to get. Absolutely. So quick hits, quick wins can be really helpful, particularly in the blue. They could be quite dangerous and distracting if you're in the red. So, but then again, that comes back to your view of quick wins as well. So you might need to reduce and change a little bit your expectations upon yourselves. Irritability, a sign of hyper, absolutely, and a result of more deadlines than can meet and letting people down. So then something about that internal environment, isn't it, is managing our expectation. If the ask of me is unreasonable, then there's something about how I allow myself to know that this is an unreasonable ask as well. Feeling like I have to shut down when I'm in meetings and don't want to contribute. Absolutely. So again, out of range when I don't want to engage. And you can see that interpersonal interaction with other people, that social interaction, all that attachment stuff flares. Our attachment systems kick in when we're in having those experiences. Put more pressure on myself, which is the opposite of what, absolutely, and that can be the temptation. So, but it's practice as well, folks, you know, thinking about the things that have worked, or trying different things, but also sharing whatever might have helped you cope a little bit. And you know what, Caroline, a little bit of wallowing is a great thing. There are times when we all need a Bridget Jones moment, and the sometimes what we do is we bounce ourselves out of the place we are, or try to bounce ourselves out of the place that we are in too fast. Wallowing is retreat. So the part of blue is also to protect and to preserve us. It's where we are safe. It's our most ancient retreating to the back of the cave. Now, of course, we don't want to stay there, but there's something about how we get the courage and confidence to emerge back out of wallowing. And again, also sometimes being distracted by that. Interesting about how even in one day you can go through highs and lows, getting a great email of an opportunity which maybe boosts your mood and motivation. But if you're not in flow, you get negative. Absolutely. So it can move, and the more you move across the range as well, the more exhausting and tiring it is, and then the more that range diminishes, which also means that smaller and smaller things can tip you out of range. Smaller and smaller things will stop you appropriately help or care seeking in those moments. When I'm read, I can find myself lying awake and I can't switch off. Absolutely. Lots of ideas. No, not always something new. I need to get up and write the ideas down, but then it makes me tired and stressed the next day. Any tips? So I would definitely do the writing still, Claire, but also maybe recognize that actually what your body's doing is it wants to go fast. So what you need to do is to slow it down. And most encouragement, if you can't sleep, get out of bed. Don't go and do something really exciting, but try and find mundane things, but actually use your bodies. For those of you that can listen to meditation or music or audiobooks, if you know you've gone to your mind, you might need to give your mind a new and different but more boring activity to do instead. So allow your body to be in the place and then help it down regulate gently. Try all sorts of different things that work for you. And also when you wake up in the middle of the night, I call those meerkat moments. When we're hypervigilant and we're wired, we're designed to wake up, because that's literally checking out that everything is okay around us. Know that you're having a meerkat moment and remind yourself about what's safe and okay enough in that moment. To sleep well, we have to have sufficient safe immobilization, and that's not lots of alcohol either. Remember, lots of alcohol is toxic shock, so don't be doing that. And unconscious really isn't asleep. So practice good sleep hygiene where you can, but allow your body to tell you what it needs and respond to that a little bit more. A real revelation was how we value caregiving and how we're missing out by not getting. Absolutely, it's really crucial at the moment. Those nuances, a look, a sigh, I mean, obviously, even a touch. That if you think about our relationships with our caregivers, they would have been quite physical. You will have learned to have lots of nonverbal signals between the people that you work with, which has an effect. So remember, when our care needs are not met, our fear system kicks in, and that's when the workable range diminishes too. I wonder if you say a bit more about flow. To what extent do you think flow is attainable consistently? Often flow feels like something I build up to. Maybe I'm definitely in flow differently, but I think of it as feeling of things coming together after a prior period of less comfortable effort, which is really common in research. Is that what you refer to being in flow? Well, of course, flow will be different for different people. So for Tiggers, flow will be very animated. It'll be like that kind of being able to respond to lots of different things sort of in the same time. Multitasking, of course, doesn't exist of a thing. It just means we do lots of things with split attention. So flow for a Tigger is one thing, but if you're a reflector, actually it might feel like bringing things together, seeing things fit, and that the flow is going to be different at different times. But what you'll get, Liam, is you'll get a sense of satisfaction in your body, and that is flow for you. So notice when it feels right, in your guts, and when you don't feel the agitation, wherever you feel the agitation, either in your chest or in your head, and notice that as much as you can for yourselves and for yourself, and remind yourself of that experience. So, but flow is just it is that coming together of different thoughts. So time is nearly, we're nearly done on time. So I don't know if anyone has any other pressing questions, but please remember that asking for help for suggestions for Tiggers stuck in blue or vice versa. So Tiggers stuck in blue, then think about who's going to give you vitality, or who's going to give you energy. And actually, for any Tiggers stuck in blue who do exercise, I'd really encourage you to start getting out and doing more exercise so you can get the endorphins. And in the same way, Eeyores that are being dragged into Tiggerdom, you need your safe spaces. You need to be able to disconnect from people, time to reflect and catch up with yourselves. So think about where your energy level is and what you might need. In terms of thinking about where you are, you can all access the staff counselling psychological support service, and what we can do is we help people normalize their experiences, and by talking through them, I've talked at 1,000 miles an hour at this rate, so very Tigger, and trust you that there'll be a collapse after this, but by talking about it, what it gives you is a chance is to see what's going on for you. Am I defensively caregiving to a whole load of other people because I cannot get my needs met anyway? Am I actually terrified? Is my workable range so squished that I have no sense of competence? And of course, what we can't do is fix those things for you, but we can help you resource yourselves. And I can't sort of encourage you enough to share any great ideas or good practices with each other. It gives people encouragement to know that it's okay to say you're not okay, but to think of different techniques and ways of working, and any ways that you can come together as a community and do that interest sharing means that in terms of that wheel is you really are working together to restore yourselves and match where you are. Don't try and shift yourself out of a place that's difficult too fast. It's too hard and it costs too much. And Sarah's, I put the survey back on. So unless there are any other big questions, we're going to finish in a minute or two, but you can contact the service if you want to. You've got the slides, you've got this recording now. There's a paper, Sally's written a paper all about workable ranges. If you want to deep dive into that, you can let me know. There's lots of writing also about the attachment theory, which I've actually run through at the University of Leeds. If you fancy joining a group which explores that in the workplace, then you get in contact with me and I can invite you to the next groups that are running as well. So remember, anyone who wasn't here, I'd kind of encourage them, rather than just to watch this, is to get one of you to explain it, because that's how we develop our community and our competence with each other as well. Okay, so thank you. And thank you for your comments and suggestions. And I could always come back and do a bit more of an interactive one of these at another time too.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicola, for an amazing hour. We have learned so much.